Hi everyone, my name is Funlola Otukoya, Africa Advisor here at Concordia. I'm here joined by Moustapha Sow, CEO of SF Capital. Moustapha, how's everything?
How's everything, Funlola?
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're just going to jump right into it. We're seeing a lot of activity on the continent right now. Last week, the AFDB, they announced a deal where it's a synthetic securitization where they're transferring the risk of their heavy industry portfolio to private investors. Do you see that this is a model that other development finance institutions can implement in their portfolios?
Funlola, absolutely. Africa is a very hot spot. The requirement in terms of financing is massive. Just in terms of infrastructure financing, for example, we are looking at 2,400 billion US dollar required by 2015 to cover the gap in infrastructure. So you could see that, ingenuity, is very important, and then how we can tap up to that financing. Obviously, you cannot find that fund in Africa. You need to go elsewhere and look at it. A private sector fund, investment funds, DFIs are playing a huge role because the perception, the risk perception of Africa is quite important. And DFIs play a very important role, basically, to provide that sufficient level of comfort to investors. So I think the initiative that the African Development Banks is putting out there is significantly important, and I think other DFIs as well. I think need to emulate that strategy. If you look at especially funds coming from Canada, as you know, the Canadians are very shy. It's not that U.S., China, or Europe that you could see being very, very active in Africa. Yeah. So I think the initiative to go to Canada, go see them, go see Canadians, it's a very liquid market. I think it's very important.
Now, you mentioned some of the other development finance institutions that are coming out of developing countries. Now, I want to take a flip side role and talk about the sort of diminishing role of Western DFIs and talk about the increasing prominence of institutions like the AAIB or the New Development Bank. What do you see as the role of these sorts of institutions in Africa and Latin America?
I mean, it's a reality. At some point, we relied on others. At certain point, we relied on others. At some point, we have to rely on our own resources. I mean, the African Development Bank is doing a lot of great things. The Afrexim Bank, which is a Cairo-based Pan-African DFI, is doing an amazing job. The Islamic Development Bank, which is mainly South Cooperation Institution, is doing a lot of things. In fact, if you look at in Senegal, for example, their largest fund, their largest funder is the Islamic Development Bank. Mm-hmm. And the benefit of it is they understand more the markets, more the reality. I mean, if you look at the World Banks, I'm not saying they're not doing great things in Africa, but I think what we're seeing them is more on the regulation side than financing our own economy. And you would see more and more, DFI. If you look at, for example, in Africa, there's so many DFIs, with Africa-based DFIs. You can see, for example, BOA there, which is another DFIs covering only the ZOF regions. You have EBIG, you have former PTA Bank, Afrexim, and as I said, you would see more and more of these DFI being involved. I think the challenge would be just to get an access to the liquidity that could allow them basically to support the financing of our economy.
Now, we're just coming off of the FOCAC meeting, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, and you saw China release a $60 billion aid package towards Africa, consisting of grants, concessionary loans, different types of financial products. How can African governments tailor their national development plans to the money that's coming out of China through the FOCAC grants or through even different initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative?
I think we have to be I'm very grateful of the money that China is injecting in Africa, but we have to be very cautious. We cannot go back to where we were 60 years ago. China, whether it's China, India, all of them, they want to come in Africa. All of them are interested in Africa. I think we need to be very careful and very wise on how basically we are taking that debt. This is very important. I think a couple of weeks ago, I've heard that China is taking over the Zambian airport. You know, I mean, obviously, that money is not a free money. One of the greatest things, one of the funniest things, you know, in Africa, whatever you talk about money, people think it's free money. You know, we have to be very careful. I mean, I'm not saying we should be closed for business. I mean, others want us. We need to be very wise. We are not in that moment where we are price taker, we could take everything. We have our own word to say now. We need to be very wise, and we need to be very cautious and very careful in how we're using that money. We cannot just let our continent, our destinies, and a future generation just peg, you know, on any piece of infrastructure that might not sometime even be. And we have to be very cautious also on how we are financing any infrastructure. Because if it's in China, they're giving us money, we need to make sure that this project being financed can basically liquidate itself. This is sometimes one of the greatest things that Mauritius is doing that unfortunately a lot of African countries are not doing it. So we have to be very cautious and very careful on how we're using the Chinese money.
You know, you mentioned something about future generations, and that's one of the pillars of Concordia Africa, youth entrepreneurship and employment. And right now, Africa has the youngest population in the world. I believe the median age is 19. My last question to you is, how do African governments ensure, and also the private sector ensure, that this is a demographic blessing as opposed to a demographic curse?
My brother, let's not fool for ourselves, Funlola. There is a fact and a reality, okay? The reality is our population, youth. The fact is, obviously, if you're looking at from historical, whatever we have, we are not preparing our generation. One of the greatest fear I have, for example, is education. If you're looking at our education system across Africa, everything was designed not to believe in ourselves. If you look at our educational system, it's borrowed from Europe, so there were the France and in the UK. If I'm looking at in Africa, nothing we are studying at school, for example, is promoting entrepreneurship. Nothing we're promoting, nothing we are promoting in our educational, nothing that we're doing in our education system is promoting believe in ourselves. I mean, how do you want to convince someone to believe in themselves? How do you want someone to focus on entrepreneurship? How do you want youth to believe in Africa if nothing we are doing is Africanized? It is not possible. You know, for me, for us to very leverage, it's not about, you know, investing in the sectors, but it's about reviewing our whole platform. I think we need a deeper look and overview of how our community is functioning. So the education, the way we are, you know, educating ourselves. One of the biggest problems, one of the biggest challenges that we do have in Africa, it's not money, it's not the population, it's we don't believe in ourselves. That is the main issue. And as long as we're not putting everything for us, for the youth, to believe in themselves, to believe that whatever you're going to achieve in Canada, in Europe, in France, you can achieve the same amount of effort that you are spending in those countries. If you spend it in Africa, you can achieve success. I mean, I think I'm a great example. I mean, I've studied, I've left Senegal, went to Canada for my university, undergrad and also grad. I joined the Ivy Leagues, I joined Citibank, but when after 2 years, I've decided to leave everything and then go back to Africa. These are the type of decisions that many Africans wouldn't have taken. But today, the result is the result. And as you see that in the discussion we were having earlier, the opportunity is there. If we are not using it as Africans, this is just going to be others that will come and do it as ourselves. So I think the message, once again, is let's believe in ourselves. I think it's one of the greatest threats we are basically facing in terms of making sure that this youth are very leveraging from this youth.
I'll let Moustapha Sow get the last word. Thank you so much for an engaging discussion. Please follow us live on everything Concordia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Funlola. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
The Africa we want. Thanks. Of course. Go there.